The Middle East has erupted once more after an Israeli airstrike killed Iran's intelligence minister Esmail Khatib in Tehran, while Washington steps up pressure on Syria's new leadership to align against remaining Iranian influence. If the violence spreads unchecked, the entire region could slide into wider chaos, with tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz at risk, again, energy prices spiking worldwide, and refugee flows overwhelming borders already strained by years of conflict. Beneath these targeted killings and diplomatic maneuvers lies a deeper contest among powers, where the United States and Israel aim to dismantle Iran's remaining networks across the region, while Syria's transitional government tries to navigate survival between old alliances and new realities. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, friends. The news hit like a thunderclap on the night of the 18th of March. An Israeli strike in Tehran eliminated Esmail Khatib, Iran's Minister of Intelligence. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian confirmed the death himself, calling it a cowardly assassination that left the nation in mourning. Israeli officials made no secret of their role, stating that Khatib had directed repression inside Iran and supported external threats. This was the third high-ranking Iranian figure killed in just 2 days, part of a sustained campaign that began with earlier strikes on the supreme leader and other security officials. The timing could not be more charged. The broader U.S.-Israeli operation against Iran is still unfolding, with American forces providing intelligence and logistical support, while Israel carries out the precision hits. Khatib's ministry had long been the nerve center for Iran's internal security and its external operations, including coordination with proxies across the region. His removal is not just the loss of one official, it severs a key link in the chain that connected Tehran to its allies in Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria. At the same time, Washington is quietly increasing its engagement with Syria's transitional authorities. The new government in Damascus, led by Ahmed al-Shara after the fall of the Assad regime, has so far tried to stay on the sidelines. Syrian officials have publicly distanced themselves from the Iran conflict, emphasizing that their priority is rebuilding the country after years of war. Yet U.S. diplomats have been pressing for cooperation, particularly on securing the border and limiting any remaining Iranian or Hezbollah presence inside Syria. This is the pulling Syria into the fray that has analysts on edge. The contrast is stark. While the U.S. is actually drawing down its own troop presence at bases like Al-Tanf in southern Syria, it is simultaneously urging the new Syrian leadership to take a more active stance against Iranian-backed elements. American officials frame this as part of the fight against terrorism and regional destabilization. Syrian leaders, however, are wary. They remember how foreign interventions have repeatedly turned their country into a battlefield, and they fear that aligning too closely with Washington could invite retaliation from Iran or its remaining friends. What makes this moment particularly dangerous is how the assassination of Khatib intersects with Syria's fragile transition. Khatib's ministry had played a role in managing Iran's relationships with its Syrian partners. His death creates a power vacuum at a time when Syria is trying to break free from old entanglements. Some analysts believe the strike was timed precisely to weaken Iran's ability to rally its remaining allies in Damascus. Others see it as part of a broader strategy to force Syria's new government to choose sides once and for all. Meanwhile, the economic fallout is already being felt. Oil markets reacted nervously to the news, with prices climbing on fears that Iran might lash out at shipping in the Gulf. European buyers are watching their winter reserves, while Asian importers are scrambling for alternative supplies. Inside Iran, the killings have triggered public mourning mixed with calls for revenge, raising the risk of further escalation. The Iranian leadership has vowed to respond, though the exact form remains unclear. The human cost is impossible to ignore. Families in Tehran are grieving not only the minister, but the sense of vulnerability that comes with repeated strikes on the capital. In Syria, ordinary citizens who have endured more than a decade of war now face the prospect of their country being drawn back into regional fire. Refugees who fled to neighboring countries are watching nervously, wondering if border tensions will rise again. These are the lives caught in the crossfire of decisions made in distant capitals. If we look at how events unfolded, the sequence is telling. The strikes on senior Iranian figures began in late February with the initial U.S.-Israeli campaign. By mid-March, the focus had narrowed to intelligence and security officials like Khatib. At almost the same moment, U.S. envoys were meeting with Syrian officials to discuss border security and counterterrorism cooperation. The two tracks are connected. Weakening Iran's internal apparatus makes it harder for Tehran to maintain influence in Syria, creating an opening that Washington is trying to exploit. Syria's new leadership is walking a tightrope. On one hand, they want to normalize relations with the West and secure reconstruction aid. On the other, they cannot afford to provoke Iran, which still retains some networks and proxy capabilities. The assassination of Khatib adds pressure because it signals that no one in Iran's system is safe. Syrian officials have responded with careful statements, condemning violence while insisting their country will not become a theater for others' wars. The shocking truth emerging from all this is how personal these power struggles have become. Khatib was not just a minister, he was a central figure in the regime's survival strategy. His elimination is meant to send a message that the campaign against Iran will not stop at military targets, but will reach the heart of its security apparatus. At the same time, the U.S. push on Syria reveals a calculated attempt to reshape the regional map by turning former Iranian allies into partners or at least neutrals. This approach carries risks. Iran has already shown it can respond through proxies and asymmetric means. If Syria feels coerced into choosing sides, the result could be renewed instability inside the country. The withdrawal of U.S. troops from certain bases was supposed to signal de-escalation, yet the diplomatic pressure suggests the opposite. The gap between public statements and private maneuvers is what keeps observers awake at night. The military logic behind the strike on Khatib is straightforward. Intelligence ministers control information and operations that keep regimes in power. Removing him disrupts both internal control and external coordination. Israel has long specialized in such targeted actions, believing that leadership decapitation can force strategic rethinking. In this case, the timing with diplomatic overtures to Syria suggests coordination between the military and political tracks. Yet history reminds us that such strategies often produce unintended consequences. Removing one official can create martyrs, harden resolve, or simply lead to replacements who are even more determined. Syria's transitional government knows this better than most after years of foreign interventions. Its reluctance to be drawn in is not weakness, but a survival instinct honed by bitter experience. The economic dimension adds another layer of urgency. Higher oil prices from renewed Gulf tensions would hit Syria's reconstruction plans hard. The country is already struggling with basic services and food security. Any wider conflict would push millions more into poverty or displacement. This is why Syrian leaders are prioritizing stability over alignment with either side. In the end, the assassination of Iran as intelligence minister and the U.S. engagement with Syria are two sides of the same coin. Both reflect a determined effort to reshape the regional order after years of Iranian influence. Whether this effort succeeds or backfires will depend on how Tehran responds and how Damascus navigates the pressure. For now, the region holds its breath. Iran's leadership has responded with a mixture of public grief and private fury. President Pezeshkian's statement was measured, calling the killing a cowardly act that would not break the nation's resolve. Yet behind closed doors, the Revolutionary Guard is already reviewing its internal security protocols and preparing contingency plans for retaliation. The loss of Khatib is not just the removal of one man. It severs a network of personal loyalties and operational knowledge that had kept Iran's intelligence apparatus humming for years. His replacement will face the impossible task of rebuilding trust while the country is under sustained pressure. Tehran has already begun signaling through proxies that it retains the ability to strike back indirectly, reminding everyone that assassinations rarely end conflicts but often prolong them in new and unpredictable forms. Syria's transitional government finds itself in the most uncomfortable position of all. President Ahmed al-Sharaba has spent months trying to steer the country toward reconstruction and international legitimacy. He has met with American officials, signaled openness to normalized relations, and even begun distancing himself from the old Iranian supply lines that once ran through Damascus. Yet the timing of Khatib's death creates a dangerous vacuum. Iranian networks inside Syria, though weakened, still exist in pockets along the border and in certain neighborhoods. If Damascus is seen to cooperate too openly with Washington as requests for tighter border controls or intelligence sharing, it risks Iranian retaliation that could destabilize the fragile peace. If it refuses, it loses the economic lifeline of Western sanctions, relief, and reconstruction aid that the country desperately needs. This is the real leverage play unfolding behind the scenes. The United States has quietly reduced its footprint at some Syrian bases, a move presented as de-escalation, while simultaneously using diplomatic channels to extract commitments from the new Syrian authorities. The goal is straightforward: permanently break the land corridor that once allowed Iran to project power through Syria to Lebanon and beyond. By removing key Iranian figures like Khatib, Washington and Jerusalem hope to make that corridor too costly and unreliable for Tehran to maintain. Syrian leaders understand the calculation perfectly. They have publicly condemned violence while privately assuring American diplomats that Iranian influence will not be allowed to regroup. The balancing act is delicate, and any misstep could reignite internal divisions that the country can ill afford. The broader regional reactions reveal how interconnected everything has become. Hezbollah in Lebanon has issued strong statements vowing revenge, yet its own capabilities have been degraded by months of conflict. Iraqi militias aligned with Iran are watching closely, debating whether to activate dormant cells or lie low. Turkey, with its own interests in northern Syria, has quietly increased its monitoring of the border while avoiding public alignment. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, relieved to see Iranian pressure reduced, are offering quiet economic incentives to the Syrian government to stay on the Western-leaning path. Even Russia, once a staunch backer of the old regime, is recalibrating its position, focused more on its own priorities than on defending Iranian interests in Damascus. Economically, the shockwaves are already traveling outward. Oil traders reacted to the news with immediate price jumps, fearing that Iran might attempt to disrupt shipping in the Gulf as a form of asymmetric response. European capitals are reviewing their winter energy stockpiles once again inside Syria. Any further instability would delay the reconstruction projects that millions of displaced people are waiting for. Families who have endured years of war now face the prospect of their fragile stability being sacrificed on the altar of great power competition. The human stories are heartbreaking. Mothers in Damascus wondering whether the next round of fighting will drive them across the border again. Young men in Tehran attending funeral processions while silently questioning how much more blood their country can afford to lose. If we step back and examine the pattern, this moment fits into a classic cycle of targeted elimination and attempted realignment. Removing high-level officials creates immediate disruption, yet it also creates martyrs and power struggles that can harden resolve rather than break it. Syria. Transition is the perfect illustration. The old regime, fall, opened a window of opportunity, but that window is now being used by external powers to reshape the map in their favor. The United States is betting that by combining military pressure on Iran with diplomatic engagement in Damascus, it can achieve what years of sanctions and airstrikes alone could not: a Middle East where Iranian reach is permanently curtailed. Whether the bet succeeds depends on how quickly Syria can stabilize and how effectively Iran can adapt. The philosophical dimension is impossible to ignore. Targeted killings of this kind raise eternal questions about the morality and effectiveness of removing individuals in the hope of changing systems. History is littered with examples where the removal of one leader simply produced another more determined to resist. At the same time, when networks of influence are truly disrupted, real change can sometimes take root. Syria today stands at exactly that crossroads. Its people have suffered enough to understand the cost of endless external meddling. Their leaders must now decide whether survival lies in accommodation with the new realities or in clinging to old alliances that have already cost them so dearly. Looking ahead, several possible paths are emerging. One is a negotiated cooling off period once the immediate cycle of retaliation runs its course. Another is a more permanent fragmentation, with parts of Syria becoming de facto zones of influence for different external powers. A third, more hopeful scenario is that the Syrian government successfully uses the current pressure to extract genuine reconstruction support, while gradually asserting true sovereignty. The most dangerous outcome would be miscalculation that draws the country back into open conflict. The coming weeks will likely determine which path gains momentum. In the meantime, the quiet human cost continues to mount. In Tehran, security officials are working around the clock to plug the gaps left by Khatib's death. In Damascus, families are trying to rebuild lives while watching the news with growing anxiety. Across the region, ordinary people who never asked to be part of this struggle are once again paying the price in uncertainty and fear. These are the realities that lie behind the headlines of assassinations and diplomatic maneuvers. The shocking truth, when all the layers are peeled back, is that this is not simply about one minister's death or one country's transition. It is about the relentless logic of power in a region where influence has always been measured in blood and alliances. The United States and Israel are attempting to write a new chapter by force. Iran is fighting to preserve what remains of its reach. Syria is caught in the middle, trying to survive the rewrite. How the story ends will depend not on any single strike, but on the collective decisions made in the days and weeks ahead. Friends, these events invite us all to reflect on the fragile nature of peace and the heavy price that ordinary people pay when great powers decide to reshape the map in the comments below. I would genuinely value your thoughts. Do you see the pressure on Syria as a necessary step towards stability or as another chapter in endless intervention? How should Iran respond without triggering wider war? What lessons should the region draw from this latest cycle of violence? Your perspectives help us all see the bigger picture more clearly. Thank you for staying with me through this full analysis. Until next time, stay observant and take care.